the x-axis, so spending per person on the x-axis, and then some sort of like aggregate health or wellness measure on the y-axis, that if you are ideally spending money efficiently, so you could sort of think of this as like being something like a production possibilities frontier. So this would be the maximum amount of health that you could produce for a given spending level. You could always end up spending this much and produce less than that if you spend it in sort of inefficient or stupid ways. But if you're sort of spending in the optimal way, the idea is that these initial investments will have high marginal return to increasing people's health. But as you spend more and more, you get out into this range where the first derivative keeps on falling, and the marginal return to spending declines, and eventually you sort of get out so far that you're essentially getting nothing in return for each additional dollar you spend. So the question is essentially, are we like here on this graph where there's still a significant return, or are we all the way up here where there's not really much to be had at this point? So the one of the reasons why it's hard to make the case that spending at the sort of the levels that we're doing it results in improved health outcomes is that variations in expenditures, both sort of across countries and across states and basically across most regions you could sort of think of, don't seem to be related to sort of corresponding changes in life expectancy or health status. So there's a vast range of expenditures across countries and regions, and yet despite that fact, there's sort of very little difference in life expectancy across many of these places. So you could think about sort of the per capita spending numbers that we read in the last lecture. A lot of other developed countries are sort of less than half the level of the U.S., but U.S. life expectancy is not higher than those other developed countries. If anything, we tend to be a little bit lower. Now, you can always make excuses for us. It's like we have a larger share of minorities who might be economically disadvantaged or immigrants or something like that, and we have less healthy lifestyles. We eat more fast food, and we drive more, and so forth. And so there are sort of reasons why you might think that absent basically you might potentially think that if we all had equalized healthcare spending across all countries, maybe the U.S. would lag other countries even more in terms of life expectancy, and it's only through this additional spending that we're sort of able to overcome our unhealthy habits. You can make that argument, but again, it's sort of that's while you can't rule out that possibility, certainly there isn't evidence that would immediately suggest that we are in fact getting a larger return on healthcare spending given that life expectancy isn't higher. And you can also see that actually even within the U.S. So it turns out that there are regions that for whatever reasons end up spending more, and regions that end up spending less. And so there's this article that's not in the reading where they look at expenditures in neonatologists per capita. So these are doctors who specialize in treating newborns. So there's a large variation in expenditures on these types of doctors on a per capita basis across regions. And so if they were if they were sort of producing better outcomes for infants, then you would hope that you'll be able to pick that up in the data in terms of, say, infant mortality or something like that. But that just doesn't show up. So even when you're looking at a region where they spend, say, twice as much on neonatologists per capita, the infant mortality level still seems to be the same as a region where they spend substantially less. And again, it's like you could maybe tell some sort of selection bias story where the regions where they spend a lot for some reason tend to have really unhealthy babies, and they're sort of reverse causality story that the babies come out all unhealthy, and so then they need to spend more on all these neonatologists to try to treat the babies, and all you're doing is getting them back up to the level at which they would have been, or getting them back up to the level at which the healthy babies with less intensive interventions are at. And again, it might be true, but it's kind of like it would be an odd coincidence that sort of wherever you look for, looking at health expenditures or looking sort of more finely in the data, expenditures on very specific types of healthcare or anything like that, wherever you look, there tends not to be a relationship between this amount of spending and the actual health outcome that you would hope would be affected. So, there's a lot of data there's a lot of studies using what we call observational data, basically data that aren't generated by a randomized controlled trial, and those studies almost uniformly seem to generally find little evidence that very high levels of spending are correlated with better outcomes. So I'm going to talk about two actual randomized controlled trials in this section. So we'll talk about the RAND health insurance experiment today, and then actually going to update the slides a little bit and talk about this very recent Medicaid experiment in Oregon as well. But the RAND health insurance experiment is something that gets cited sort of again and again and again in the health econ literature, just because it was a true randomized controlled trial where they didn't literally assign health insurance to patients, but they basically randomly assigned health insurance of varying degrees of generosity to people. So the bad thing about this is that it's now very old. It was conducted back in the 1970s. But the good thing about it is that they did actually basically go in and say, well, we want to test how having more generous health insurance affects both spending on spending side, so how many procedures you end up using and so forth, as well as health outcomes. So does it actually seem to improve health when you start to spend more, assuming that people do respond to more generous insurance by spending more. So what they did in this study, so it was run or administered by RAND, which is like a firm based, they have offices in various places, but the main office is down in Santa Monica. I think they used to be a think tank in World War II or something, but now they do a lot of sort of evaluations of social policy and health policy and so forth. So what they did is they randomly assigned patients to different insurance plans, and there were 4 different plans that people could get assigned to. I mean, maybe patients isn't the right word. They took households or individuals and they assigned them to these plans, and then probably at some point during the experiment they became patients because they went to the doctor. So there are 4 different plans. So the first plan, which was the most generous, was just free care. So this is anything you want, any healthcare you want, totally covered, no co-payments, no co-insurance, nothing. You want it, you got it. So that's a plan that basically to a first approximation does not exist anywhere in the United States anymore. The second plan was sort of a plan that incorporated what we call modest cost sharing. So there was an individual deductible for annual expenditures. Remember, again, this is a while ago, so a $150 deductible. Today it's you would just kind of laugh at that, but back then it was a non-trivial amount. So there was this individual deductible for annual expenditures. That means up until the point at which the household has spent $150 on healthcare, they're paying out of pocket, and then after that, everything else is covered for free. The sort of next most generous plan, so this is going from sort of most generous to least generous, was one where there was either a 25% or a 50% coinsurance rate up to an income-based limit that was generally somewhere between 5 to 15% of family income. So basically what that means is that first you take your family income. So if your family income were $100,000 and you say it was the middle of that range, so it was 10%, what that's going to say is that, or what that's going to imply is that the maximum your family could spend out of pocket would be $10,000. So up until the point at which they've spent $10,000, they would have to either pay 25 cents on the dollar for the care or 50 cents on the dollar for the care. Again, the actual, it would not be up to $10,000 because it was so much lower back then. The actual amount would probably be more in the range of $1,000 or something. But you're going to basically be paying either for 25% or 50% of your costs up until that point, and then after you get to that point, again, full coverage, so you don't pay for anything for that. Most families probably wouldn't get to that point in a given year unless they had a major health event. And then the last and least generous plan was what they call a catastrophic plan. So basically, the family has to pay all of the costs for healthcare. There's no insurance up until they hit some sort of income-based limit, which you'll sometimes sort of hear this referred to as like a stop-loss limit in the health econ literature. But basically, you can think of it as sort of being like this 25% or 50% coinsurance plan, except it's a 100% coinsurance plan. So you just have to pay the full cost up until you just hit that limit. So in that one, basically, probably the majority of families were just paying for all of their healthcare in a given year. The only way they would end up hitting that limit and having insurance kick in would be if they had some sort of major health event like a birth or somebody had a heart attack or something like that. So those were sort of the 4 plans, and so they took all these households and they randomly assigned each one to one of the 4 plans and then studied how both healthcare expenditures changed for each of the households and how health outcomes changed. So the first conclusion that became apparent was that, in fact, the high coinsurance and high deductible plans did significantly reduce healthcare expenditures. So people in those high deductible plans where you had like the 25 or 50% coinsurance or even the 100% coinsurance up until you hit some sort of stop loss, they had on average maybe about 30% fewer doctor visits. So that's, fewer doctor visits probably is not a big surprise, just in the sense that there's a lot of times you go to the doctor where it's not totally clear whether or not you need to go. Like you might just be debating internally whether you should go even when it doesn't cost you anything. So if you also tack on a cost of that, it's not surprising that it might sort of swing people towards not going to the doctor in cases where it's somewhat ambiguous. They also have 20% fewer hospitalizations, so that might be a little bit more surprising. Yeah, sorry, this is compared to relative to the free care. So they also have 20% fewer hospitalizations, so that might be a little bit more surprising because you wouldn't think of hospitalizations as being something that's quite so elective. You would tend to think that you're in the hospital, you're there because you need to be there, and so you might not think that having high deductible would reduce hospitalizations, but in fact it does, or at least it did. And so in net, then they had about 25 to 30% lower total healthcare expenditures. It's also interesting to note that, again, this is like a long time ago, so I don't know whether or not that would carry through today, although I suspect it might still, but all of the reductions here were due to essentially lower quantities, not lower prices. So it didn't seem that people were sort of seeking out cheaper doctors who would cost less when they were assigned to these high deductible plans as opposed to when they were assigned to free care. It seems like they just reduced the total amount of care that they used. Again, so the reason I think, or I suspect that would be true even today, is just that it's very difficult to sort of go like price shopping for doctors. This isn't like when you go into Subway or you go into any sort of normal retail store where the price of the procedure is just listed up front for you. I think at some point when you're meeting with a doctor, there might be a discussion of cost. When they start giving you treatment options, they're said, like you have this particular, like here's my diagnosis, you have this particular condition. Maybe we could, just do, I don't know, it could be something that's related to injury on your arm or something like that. And right, they might suggest like, well, just do a more conservative thing, or just give you like physical therapy and maybe some painkillers or something. Or if you have like maybe there's some break or something, maybe it would benefit from surgery. You could instead do surgery. And at that point, like especially if you didn't have insurance, there might be some discussion of like, well, the surgery is substantially more costly than just doing PT or something like that. But honestly, even the doctor wouldn't know the costs probably. They would just know that it is more costly. And certainly, it's not like you would have gone into the visit and been like, hey, how much is this visit going to cost me in terms of just the consultation and everything. So even I think sort of like conversations about price inside the doctor's office tend to be viewed as sort of like uncomfortable because you're just supposed to be getting medical advice. And even if you wanted to sort of talk about price, I think that in most cases you simply they either won't provide you with information or they in some cases don't even know the information themselves. So it's not surprising that people don't end up sort of using cheaper doctors even when they have to pay more out of pocket. So it is it was very clear from the experiment that certainly healthcare spending dropped. But the other question that we're interested in, of course, is what happened to their health. So is it the case that the procedures and the doctors and so forth that are getting crowded out here once you go to high deductible plan, are those things that actually seem to measurably improve health, or are they things that maybe there was sort of little impact to crowding out? So big surprise, reduced healthcare spending didn't seem to have any substantial impact on most of the health outcomes. So the things that they were able to measure, to be clear, like it's not. It's hard to measure health, especially over relatively short periods. It's easy to sort of look at like a 90-year-old and conclude that they're less healthy than a 30-year-old or something like that. But we're only talking about like a 3 or 4 or 5 year period here max. So it's not immediately clear that even if you do have some sort of reduction in your sort of health capital stock that could become a problem in the long run, it's not immediately clear you would pick it up in the short run. That being said, they did their best to try to come up with as many measures of these people's health as possible. So they had various measures of their physical health, so not just like their weight and their height and stuff like that, but their actual functioning, so like whether they could walk upstairs and do various tasks and stuff like that. Role functioning, so they had mental health, so basically trying to survey people, figure out whether or not they're depressed and so forth. They looked at the number of social contacts they had. They had like just self-reported health, like how healthy do you feel in various ways. They looked at smoking rates, at weight and cholesterol levels, various other sort of blood markers. They looked at blood pressure and vision, and then they also created basically this mortality risk index, which was basically like a combination or weighted average of a bunch of these different measures. So some of these things like blood pressure and cholesterol and smoking and so forth will be predictive of mortality rates, and so they would combine them together to come up with this risk index. 4 years later, they did not basically none of these measures showed any statistically significant differences between these various groups, except for a couple things. So one was this shouldn't be a big surprise. So the people in the high deductible group, or I should say the people in the free care group relative to those in the high deductible group, did have better corrected vision. This was statistically significant. So you can just like interpret this as if you are able to get free pair of glasses every single year, then of course you're always going to update your prescription and end up having better corrected vision. Whereas if you have to take them out of pocket, you might say like, well, it's not 20/20 anymore, but maybe it's 20/30, and I don't really care that much to buy new glasses. I mean, this kind of point is also I guess from a time when like vision was actually covered under healthcare benefits. That's no longer the case now. So you have separate vision benefits from your health plan. So they did have better corrected vision. It's probably not really like something that we were super interested in trying to figure out there. The other thing that showed a slight improvement was that the free care group had slightly lower diastolic blood pressure. It's kind of at the margin of statistical significance, and they tested a lot of outcomes. So I would be a little bit cautious in interpreting this as like necessarily representing a true effect, as opposed to just representing the fact that if you run enough tests across enough different outcomes for statistical significance, you will eventually find one outcome at least that rejects, because there's always a 1 in 20 chance that you're going to reject at our standard level of 5% significance. So there might have been some slight improvement there, although it's not super strong. And then there were no other significant differences. The mortality risk index that I mentioned, basically those indices range from like 0.98 to 1.03. So 1 would just been sort of like the baseline level. It would represent no change at all for the free care group versus the higher deductible groups. And so they're getting sort of 1 or 2% changes in one direction or the other, but they're all statistically insignificant. That being said, if you thought about like some of the BSL levels that we talked about in the millions of dollars, even if you had a very small change in the risk index that was too small to like reject it from a statistical standpoint, if that were a true change, it still might be worth a significant amount of money because you'd be taking just a 1 or 2% change, but then multiplying that by $1 million or $5 million or something like that. So you don't have, it's not the most highly powered study in the world in terms of having tons and tons of observations. Okay, so we'll talk about a more recent study as well that's been done in Oregon when we come back next week.